weather enthusiasts. I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have quite a few things to talk to you about today as we are starting to enter into August. Starting tomorrow, August 1st is tomorrow, so we have a lot to talk to you about today as to what we could be expecting over the next month or so, as well as some new models and some new data to take a look at, as well as a few requests that our audience have asked us. So we'll be covering all of those today. But first, today's the trade deadline for MLB. I'm wearing my Astros hat because I'm hoping for some good trades to happen. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it right here. So starting off, what we got for you right here is I've been kind of taking a quick look at this for right here. We have the tropical cyclone probabilities pulled up for the European. We're going to be talking about these on them by themselves, as well as the anomalies and a few other things as well. And we're going to be doing some satellite to kind of collaborate with that as well. So here's what we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. As we're getting to, at this current point, this was initialized yesterday, July 30th, and as we're getting to this current point right here, this is for August 4th to August 11th of 2025, what we're starting to see here is more and more probabilities of tropical development happening in the MDR as more and more of these tropical waves start coming off the coast of Africa. We have a pretty significant wave train that's starting to move out of the region into the Atlantic Ocean at this current point in time that we're going to continue to watch and continue to pay attention to as well. But we're also still seeing a big probability over here, about 40 to 50% off the Carolinas coast in Virginia as well, similar to what the Climate Prediction Center has put out for us in previous days. Let's go ahead and go back to what we had on the 27th. So those odds have kind of remained pretty stable, but they've really started to turn up across much of the MDR. They really saw an uptick a couple of days ago, and now we're starting to see that again, so we're going to pay attention to it. We're seeing more and more of these probabilities starting to add up. Now, I do want to stress that this is relatively wind-derived, and it's ultimately a situation where there's not really much to it. Like, this is measuring winds of 25 knots or greater with this. It doesn't really indicate that much in terms of organization, in terms of convection, and all of that stuff. It just determines wind speed quite generally, and that's where we're at with this right here. However, it is an important tool to look at once we start seeing wave trains come off, because we can indicate how strong they're going to be, if they have a good chance of potentially developing, and a few other things as well. So we can start paying more attention to these in the next few days. So we'll go ahead and keep you updated on that. But let's go ahead now and show you the forecast anomalies with this for you right here. This is what we have for the week of the 4th to the 11th. We're noticing a few blips, about 10 to 20% higher anomalies and a few blips across parts of the main development region, but it's really concentrated off the coast of the Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic over here, where the Climate Prediction Center has indicated that development is possible. Over there, we can go ahead and show you that map once again. And as you can see, we're looking at 20+% across much of Florida, across the Carolinas, Georgia, the Bahamas, and those areas, kind of cooperating with what the European is going for at this current point in time. But as you're going to start to see next week, those odds do shift towards the main development region, and we can go ahead and show you those right now. So that's what we got for you right here. Let's go ahead and go to next week, and we'll start off with the forecast and then go to the anomalies. Here's the situation. We really see a pretty big turn up across much of the main development region and in parts of the Central America as well, and the Gulf over the next couple of weeks or so, and that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. And we'll go ahead in a few minutes talk about my 3 main areas of concern, just to kind of talk about that going forward. But as you can see, we have a really big uptick of chances of development right here as we get towards the 11th to the 18th. Definitely a bit of an increase compared to what we've seen previously, and that's really expanded as well. But if you look at the forecast anomalies, those are also really starting to go up as well. You have a pretty big above average probability of tropical development across the MDR, parts of the Caribbean, and in parts of the Atlantic Basin as well. to a few days ago just to show you that, because before we were kind of seeing it mostly scattered in a few areas, but then over the last couple of days it's really started to ramp up and it's really started to increase as we start to see this load. Yesterday's was definitely a bit more bullish as it heads kind of more towards the Caribbean, and so those are going to get adjusted as time goes on, but you've really started to see those probabilities turn up as you get into mid-August across much of the MDR. So that is something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. Moving on to the 18th to the 25th, not really that much of a surprise, I would say, right here with the forecast right here, although it is a little surprising to see this continue to increase, as well as kind of seeing how this has shifted a bit further to the south. And then going from the 25th to September 1st, when kind of the MDR really starts to turn up. Like, this is more climatologically, but basically by the time we get to August 25th to September 1st, you're seeing those probabilities really uptick quite a bit across much of the basin, and that is something we're going to want to pay attention to, as that signals the start of hurricane season for a lot of you guys, and we're going to want to keep very close tabs for pretty much the Antilles, for much of the coasts, and those areas as well along the U.S., Mexico, maybe Central America as well. So we have a lot of things that we're going to need to talk about and pay attention to today. So moving on right here, taking a quick look at satellite, we do have some tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa at this current point in time. That wave train is going to continue for the next few months. We can talk more about that in a little bit, but there are three main areas that I am very concerned about going into August. These are areas I am concerned about not just climatologically, but also because I'm looking at these and these are kind of indicating to me, okay, we're going to watch this. The tropics are really starting to turn up and we're going to want to pay attention to these. These three areas are obviously the main development region, the Central American Gyre, and in the Gulf Coast, in those areas. Those are the three main areas I'm concerned about. MDR I've kind of talked about ad nauseum for quite a while, and the Central American Gyre we can go ahead and start talking about that a little bit. So essentially the big question for I'm sure a lot of you is, Patrick, what is a Central American Gyre and how does that contribute to hurricane season? Well, let's go ahead and zoom in on satellite and kind of talk about it a little bit more. So the Central American Gyre, for those of you who do not know, it's pretty much a broad area of low pressure or multiple areas of broad low pressure that kind of hang around parts of Central America, given the name Central American Gyre. And a gyre is pretty much that low pressure system that I was talking about. That's just kind of the name it's given. So ultimately what happens is you start seeing a lot of convection, and then you start seeing a bit of a low pressure system starting to develop either on or offshore in the Atlantic. It starts to slowly detach as it moves either further to the north or to the west, and then it kind of becomes its own low pressure system, and then starts to organize and develop into a tropical cyclone. So that's kind of your general gist with the Central American Gyre, and in the past we've seen multiple storms come off of the gyre that have really started to impact a lot of people, like especially in August we've noticed it quite a bit. Actually in 2023 we had Hurricane Idalia. That was a good example of that. We also had Hurricane Helene that came off the Central American Gyre. Another infamous example is Hurricane Michael back in 2018. That was a Central American Gyre storm. Hurricane Milton in 2024 was also a bit of a weird one as well. I believe it was influenced by the Central American Gyre, but it was kind of mainly originated as a low pressure system in the western Gulf region over here off the coast of Mexico. That was a very interesting setup right there. But we've had multiple big systems come off the gyre and start to organize and develop and do all of that stuff. And kind of the biggest reason I'm highlighting this is mainly because of the threat this poses to a lot of people. A Central American Gyre storm generally moves more so to the northwest, more so to the west, which ultimately puts a lot of people potentially in the Yucatan Peninsula, off the coast of Cuba over here, Isle of Youth, but especially the Gulf Coast. That puts those areas in a huge amount of fire right here. That's pretty much puts a lot of people in a line of fire that you're going to want to pay attention to. And the Central American Gyre is kind of one of those originating areas that we continue to monitor as forecasts. I will say, Central American Gyre systems are generally somewhat difficult to forecast for as well, which is why they're so dangerous. Until recently, we didn't really have the models kind of backing up what the gyre was going to ultimately do. We'd always have the system start to organize, then to develop, the models catch up on it, and then explosive development starts. And then you have a Category 4 or Category 3 system making landfall in the Gulf region. And we saw that with multiple instances, of, like I've just mentioned. But the reason I bring this up is because this, in my opinion, is arguably the most dangerous type of hurricane and dangerous type of tropical cyclone to deal with compared to what you would see with the main development region. Because main development region, you know it's coming ahead of time. If it develops in the MDR, the Lesser Antilles have usually 2 to 3 days to prepare, and then areas to the west have more time than that. But with the Central American gyre, you don't have as much time to really get prepared, really allow for the system to organize, and it does it so quickly that by the time you wake up the next morning, it's already a Category 3 hurricane, and you have 24 hours to get out of where you need to get to. Hurricane Helene was a good example of this, actually, where it came off the gyre. It started organizing. It kind of struggled a little bit as it was heading towards the Gulf region through the Yucatan Peninsula, but it was a Category 1 hurricane that was dealing with some dry air issues. I remember this pretty discreetly, but then it underwent an eye wall replacement cycle that pretty much drained all the dry air out of the system. And then from then on out, it exploded in intensity, went to a 140-mile-per-hour hurricane, and made landfall as that Cat 4 in the Florida Big Bend region, caused a lot of damage over there, as well as in the western parts of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia as well. Those are really bad areas that were hit. And the worst part about it is, a lot of people didn't realize how big of a threat Helene was until about like 24 hours before it made landfall, because it was struggling initially. We weren't sure what was going on. Then it underwent an eye wall replacement cycle, and all hell pretty much broke loose. So those are kind of the examples I give you right there. Same thing with Hurricane Michael back in 2018. Hurricane Michael also kind of formed off the gyre. A lot of people thought it was going to be a tropical storm. It became a Category 5 hurricane in 2 days. So that's the kind of versatility that these systems can do, and that's the kind of volatility with the forecasts that these systems kind of have. So that's why I'm kind of highlighting it as a possible area that we need to pay attention to. And those typically start to kind of become more prevalent around late August or so, throughout much of September, throughout all of October as well, and even in parts of November. Those are pretty concerning, to say the very least. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. Other area is the main development region. We can go ahead and go over there. I'll talk very briefly about it, then we'll get to some conditions, because I know we have a few requests for those. So here's what we have for the main development region. I have the Eastern Atlantic pulled up to kind of give you an emphasis of what's going on here. We have a pretty big wave train that's currently moving through Africa right now. This is the Sahel monsoon that you're looking at right here. And as more of these tropical waves start to come off the coast of Africa, that's going to help moisten up the atmosphere. It's going to help kick out a lot of the dry air, a lot of the Sahara dust, and it's really going to allow tropical development chances to skyrocket as time continues to go on. I know I've been saying late July, early August when the MDR and a lot of hurricane seasons are going to wake up. I would argue that it's waking up now just by doing this. So that's the number one. Number two, you have very powerful waves for the next few months that are coming off the coast of Africa, and they're getting further and further and further up to the north in better and better areas for tropical development, and that is a big concern that I have for this as well. So we're going to have to continue to pay attention to that as it evolves. Also, MDR is very notorious for producing a lot of very powerful systems, so you're going to want to pay attention to that as well. Hurricane Irma was an infamous example. Hurricane Maria originated, I believe, in the MDR as a tropical wave, then it exploded to a Cat 5. Another infamous example of this was Hurricane Fiona. That was a pretty bad situation. Developed in the MDR, crashed into Puerto Rico as well. And then we had Hurricane Lee in 2023. That was a Category 5 hurricane that didn't do too much in terms of making landfall and all of that, but that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with in this region. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to moving forward. The next thing we're going to go ahead and show you is some conditions, because I know we've been getting some requests about that. Someone in the comments was requesting that we talk about the trade winds, and I think these are very important. And I think this is also why the Climate Prediction Center has highlighted this area in particular for the next couple of for the next week or so as an area of interest and an area of potential development. So let's go ahead and start talking about that. So here's what we have: trade winds generally across much of the tropics right here. These are the red. What we have, what we have right here is kind of more favorable for warming of the waters. Not as much not as much tropical developments that's going on. Kind of not as favorable for that, but it does help warm the oceans considerably, which is why you've seen the Gulf, the Caribbean, and MDR really skyrocket in water temperatures. But the purple is indicating weaker trade winds and indicating more and more potential for tropical development. And starting around August 9th, that's when you're noticing this flip of the trade winds across much of the region that's highlighted by the Climate Prediction Center. By the time we get to August 11th, it's pretty widespread, and that's a lot more of a favorable area of tropical development. And that's also about the time that the wind shear in that region also collapses as well. And then as you get to the 14th, the MDR starts to become more favorable for tropical development as well. So basically, these readings that I'm getting right here, we are looking at a potential situation where this hurricane season could escalate very quickly. And I don't say that very lightly, but also because this is hurricane season and we're going into August, that's when it typically does. But you could definitely see that switch go from quiet to explosive like that. And this is kind of one of those patterns that's starting to transition to that. If the purple was a bit further to the south, it would definitely emphasize that a bit more, but we'll have to pay attention to those trends, and we'll have to talk more about that. But here's what we have for you right here for the wind shear. This is kind of how it cooperates right here. Looking at the wind shear across much of the tropics definitely is pretty low. Across the Caribbean, low. Gulf, low. Atlantic Basin is still kind of mixed, but it does decrease as you get to August 4th, August 5th, August 6th. As well, as you're starting to take a look at that, you're really starting to notice the shear across much of the tropics ultimately collapse. Like this is... We've seen like shear fluctuate up, down, collapse in some regions, but this is a collapse across all the tropics by the time we get to August 8th. This, in my opinion, is when we really start seeing stuff. In my opinion, we're already open for business in some regions, but across the entire Atlantic, as we get to August 8th, this map right here is why I am saying that the hurricane season will be open for business around the first to second week of August. This map right here. And I don't say this very lightly, but given the low wind shear values that we're seeing right here, and the fact that they do fluctuate a little bit here and there, but given that they continue, and we see that persist and all the wind shear just goes up and then down and then continue to be favorable, that's when I would say we're looking at favorable. Now we can go ahead and show you the moisture, because that's also another thing to pay attention to. Yes, there is still some dry air across much of the Atlantic. I have been watching that, but the dry air that's currently over there is not as powerful, and it can be more easily mixed out by a pretty strong moisture plume and pretty strong tropical waves that are coming off the Sahel region. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. I mean, look at this. By the time we get to August 10th, a lot of the dry air that's been kind of inhabiting much of the Atlantic, it's now getting pushed into Europe. You're not seeing as many Sahara dust areas that you would see previously. You're not seeing the Sahara dust returns. You're not seeing the dry air returns that we were seeing previously. This is in a more favorable area of development. And before you start commenting that this means nothing, this also shows that. This is precipitable water. Pretty much how much more precipitable water we have compared to the climatological average. This is a more moist environment than average, and this, coupled with the low wind shear and coupled with the switch of the trade winds, is why I believe August is going to be very busy. And we're going to want to watch this if you're in the Antilles, if you're in the Bahamas, if you're in Central America, if you're in Mexico, if you're in the Gulf Coast, if you're on the East Coast, and in the Mid-Atlantic region. The Atlantic is getting open for business. And as we get deeper into August, It's going to continue to get more and more active, and we'll keep you updated on that here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Watch out for the trade deadline. I know that's coming up in a couple of hours by the time this video goes out. But if you want to help out, hang out, or ask us some questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.